I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Emmy-nominated Cate Hall, makeup and hair supervisor on season 4 of Netflix's flagship drama, The Crown. Cate, this season you were tasked with recreating iconic real-life personalities, just like other seasons, but many of us are so intrinsically familiar with these particular people. So unless they look flawless and real, the show kind of falls over because of our entrenched expectations of what they're supposed to look like. So no pressure, right?
Yeah, it was dreadful. But it was a sort of mix of dreadful and joyful, because what goes hand in hand with that really familiar memory is a huge amount of material that's available to inspire. So I think on the one hand, there's this huge pressure to deliver something that people remember and feel familiar with, but that also is within my collective consciousness and kind of feels accessible to me in a very real way. So it was scary, but it was really exciting to do something that felt like it had this really high expectation.
It sure did. The anticipation for Diana's introduction was very high, probably the highest that this show's ever seen in terms of a new character coming on, for very obvious reasons, because of the mystique and popularity still to this very day. So talk us through what went into recreating her look in the early years of her life.
Yeah, so obviously we had in mind that there was this huge journey to take the character on through the season. And I think the wonderful thing when they cast Emma Corrin was it didn't feel to me like we were asking the audience to make an absolutely enormous leap psychologically, which I think maybe with Thatcher, it's a little bit less believable. You think Gillian Anderson, kind of one of the most attractive people ever, playing Margaret Thatcher, who's this kind of villain. Whereas with Emma, she was, she had the capacity to play this very vulnerable, very young ingenue. And we just felt like it was our job to really enhance that. So we kept everything in the early stages as natural as possible. So although it was a wig that was not kind of overtly styled. We tried to make her as unmanufactured as possible. We used very little makeup, no skin makeup. We were fortunate that her skin is beautiful, so we could do that. And we did things with the wig, like we had a sort of bald piece under the crown to kind of really sell it to look like skin. And we kept the shape really round. So we tried to emphasize all of the roundness and the youth in Emma. And then as the season progressed, we used another 2 sets of wigs, which we would progressively dye and highlight more and more. And we would style them and make them bigger. And then we would use the beauty makeup trends of the 80s just to kind of angle the makeup and use the frosting and the pigment and the powder to create a kind of mask, which I think is what Diana did, to create this image that felt very deliberate and very media savvy, so that by the end of the series, what we see is someone who's really grown up in the public eye and is now sort of presenting herself quite deliberately. Whereas at the beginning, we wanted it to look very unself-conscious and very natural. And we did things like we got a hairdresser from the 80s to come in and teach us very specifically how to do that Diana cut, which is very nuanced and very counterintuitive to anything you would do now.
Yeah, wow. See, there's so much that's going on screen to the untrained eye that we just take for granted that it's like, yeah, you just slapped it together and it's all good, but it's so not the case.
It takes so many hours and hours and hours to get the wigs into shape. But my hope is that people often don't really realize. I mean, obviously with Gillian, you would assume it's a wig because it's kind of crazy. But my hope is that with Emma, that people are surprised with that early hairstyle, that it is even a wig. And if we can make our wigs look supernatural through loads and loads and loads of effort, but that you don't really read that effort on screen, then that's kind of my dream. And I think that's what we do on that. That's our kind of aim on The Crown versus other shows that look kind of, they have a much bigger design aesthetic, whereas I think we probably put just as much work in to trying to step back and hopefully people don't notice it too much.
And be invisible. Let's talk about Gillian Anderson as PM Margaret Thatcher, because I found it to be an uncanny resemblance, and her performance is so astounding. I think she's the best ever that I've ever
Me
seen.
too. Me too. And
Never.
I'm just a bit in love with her and her voice. I just felt to us like we had quite a lot to live up to. So we had to do her justice. So for me, my theory is always that if we can establish an outline that people recognize, and then the actor is creating this performance and this voice, then our job for everything in the middle is just not to bring attention to it, so that ideally you can just forget. And that if we can let an audience forget that they're watching something that's dramatic fiction and just really immerse themselves, so everybody's sort of defending the world of the story all the time. And with Gillian, I think people thought we were using prosthetics, which we definitely weren't. In fact, we had
Really?
really light touch with her makeup, again because we just are trying to do this very truthful, authentic tightrope walk between the actor and the character they're playing, because the last thing we want is to do anything that feels like parody or that's hokey.
Yeah,
So it's all really, I think the wig is the thing.
it really is. And I mean, yeah, I'm surprised by that, because I just thought the makeup must have been so extensive, and it is in other ways. Like, it's so nuanced, as you say, and yet extremely effective. And I wonder then, with actors such as Gillian and Emma, and even Josh O'Connor playing Charles, I mean, there's a very light touch on him as well, but it's so important for him to get into character. What is the feedback that you get from these really great actors about how your work and your team's work is so critical to them to get into the headspace of these characters?
I just think it's a really pleasurable process. And I think the nice thing is actually all actors are different in the way they approach things. So some actors are really engaged in the process, which is lovely, and some will just fall asleep in the chair while you're doing your thing, which is equally a great compliment. So I think the lovely thing is that they typically come to me, and this is the great fortune of my position, having done these a season previously, is they come with a level of trust, and they know it's a process. So we start, here, and then there are many fittings, but there's not really a freak out in that process. It's like it's this lovely experimental period, and we tend to sort of chuck all the tricks we have at them. So we might try teeth or plumpers, which go inside to change face shape. We dye eyebrows in quite a subtle way. We love to bleach an eyebrow. And what's lovely is they typically come to that with this very playful enjoyment, and that makes it it's a really silly way to get paid to make a living, is to come into a room and just play. And that's what we do, and we do it for hours and hours and hours, until we get to the point where I think between us, costume, because costume, you're using bodysuits and all kinds of stuff as well to very subtly manipulate shape, and then obviously the other departments, but particularly speech and movement. And the actors then have this lovely period where, as that's all coming together and they're finding their voice and they're finding their smile and things like that, there's often a sort of, not a eureka moment, but a moment where we all go, okay, we've got this, now we can just relax and kind of just enjoy it, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the attention on your work is on the Thatcher character and Diana, but you did have to make some changes, obviously, from season 3 to season 4, because a lot of the other characters have gotten older and they've evolved, particularly like Olivia Colman's Queen, Helena Bonham Carter's character as well. So can you talk us through some of the work that you were doing there that was quite different to season 3, and how you had to really mix things up?
And I felt like Helena's character particularly had a lovely journey because of her, when she was starting in her 30s, really, and she was definitely experimenting with hair pieces and actually in real life hair pieces and wigs and all sorts of elaborate do's. So we had this journey to make for Helena where she sort of settled into almost middle age. So we didn't want to make her as playful as before, and we wanted to give her a more settled sort of mature feel. So we made some really subtle tweaks. We kept her nape. She's got such a lovely jawline. So we kept the nape clear on the wig, and sort of faked Margaret's silhouette of the time, which was this lovely wave that comes down into here. But we tried to make it slightly less glitzy. And then with her skin, we took the makeup down so that you could see more of her skin. And of course, we had to evolve the makeup for the period. So I feel although I don't know if many people would have even noticed that progression, I think there was a moment at the beginning of season 3 where they flashed back, at season 4 where they flashed back. And for me, that was really satisfying, because then you get to see this side by side thing. And it's only really when you see them side by side that you go, oh, they are different. Because as I say, we tried to do everything. I'm just looking at wigs as I talk to you, because it sort of triggers my thinking. And with Philip, you know, we added greys through the Philip and Queen wigs, but we also gave him a much less clean silhouette. So it was a bit more 80s, it was a bit more square around the nape, but it was also just very fluffy, which was really enjoyable.
Yeah, it really did look like they had aged quite significantly, and especially Margaret. She was so, as you say, less playful and more austere, and I think that was very fitting with her, where her character was. Which brings me to this question. This is a more difficult question for me to get right, but it's more about the makeup work on any given character often like accentuates their mental and physical state sometimes without us even realizing as the audience. It's part of the process, I assume, of designing how a character might look in particular scenes. I was wondering if that comes up very often in this show, if you've got an example of where a character is stressed or tired or depressed, and you're doing something to accentuate the performance.
Yeah. So we through our prep period, will create what we call a story order. So we'll take the breakdown of the scenes in the story days, and then we'll plot for the individual characters where they're at emotionally, what happens in those scenes. Do they cry? Do they hurt themselves? Are they tired? Are they drunk? Are they hungover? So you might do a full beauty hair and makeup, but then start to remove concealer under the eyes, put some sort of red in the waterline. We might add tears on set, or, deliberately start to smudge makeup. And it's what I love about working in TV and film as opposed to fashion, is that there's this there's layers, and it's always about creating the layers that gives you the feeling of a 3-dimensional character. So rather than just always going for this kind of immaculate polish.
Yeah, it seems more true to life. I guess the only thing that you don't really have to do very often is like huge injuries and like gashes in faces, although the Fagin episode may have had some of that.
Yeah, he was a bit beaten up and bruised, which was really good fun.
Yeah.
We don't do loads and loads and loads of blood. There might be the odd prosthetic. There might be a kind of fun set piece in every season. But again, we film for 7 months. So if you imagine the extent of material that we film that doesn't make it in, actually.
Wow.
So no, I have to say, we film a lot in stately homes during daylight hours. So when this job ever ends and I find myself on a night shoot in a horror film, I'm just going to be completely out of my depth.
Yeah, you'll be beside yourself. But I know, right? I'm so glad you raised that, because on a show like this, in those beautiful big palatial homes and homesteads with the very natural lighting, if you stuff up the makeup and it's not really on point, we're going to notice it. And then it's going to take me as the viewer out of the scene. So the pressure is also on for you to do that. And I think it comes up most of all with Diana and this 80s vibe that you're going for, a completely different time period. So was that a concern for you? Was it always something that you had to work through and make sure that you got, completely right?
Yeah, as in maintaining her makeup because I think her makeup was really important. The fact that we know Diana used makeup emotionally as a crutch. We know she used her, the more blue eyeliner and mascara that went on, that she's struggling. And for her, it was her war paint. So I think for us, actually it was really vital that that 80s makeup worked, but it worked so well to age Emma. And I think to support and sort of underpin the emotional narrative, I in terms of maintaining it, that's sort of just what you have to do all the time. So it's not a problem, but because we film in blocks that aren't chronological, you actually might find that you're going from one wig and one makeup to something from the end of the series. So I think it probably helped Emma in that respect, because she's having to make those big emotional leaps, and if at least if her appearance is kind of helping to support that. You know, there was a lot of really difficult stuff to film with her with bulimia, and I feel like, I know that when I've had to say, when I was training and practicing with special effects, if you make yourself look ill, you kind of feel ill. So I think there's a real relationship there. And so I like to think that the very subtle bits we did with those scenes hopefully helped, because I think she did a really convincing job. And she worked really hard to do that, you know, to very sensitively handle that bulimia storyline.
Absolutely.
So hopefully that we helped with that.
Yeah, and I think the point of the question was, and you got it spot on, is like, I always try to think of what are the challenges for whoever I'm talking to. And I imagine for the makeup and hair department, it's either spending the whole day maintaining it, or it's getting up before everyone else does, before the sun, routinely, and being ready to go when everyone else turns up. Is that about right? Like, they're the two main, most difficult things during the shoot, not before the shoot.
Yeah, I mean, I think because we have a really big team on The Crown, and we all have very different roles. So as the designer, my challenges are about trying to be quite strategic in terms of creating these looks, but then working out how the hell we're going to realize them across two units that might be shooting in different countries at the same time, shooting totally different time periods. We've got these huge storylines to tell that will go from 1978 to 1991, and how to do that in a way that means we don't compromise the shooting schedule, because if we take 3.5 hours to do a change, then you might as well throw the shoot day out of the window, and it's a lot of money. Plus you need to be hitting your marks all the time with new characters, and we have 260 characters or something across a season. So there's a kind of juggle for me in terms of schedule and design, and how those two things go hand in hand. But then for the team who are on the floor through the shoot, they might be following their characters between the two units, and even just making sure the wigs are in the right place. You know, it's like you might be traveling a wig on an aeroplane that has to be dressed and ready to go, because you're going to get off the aeroplane and go straight to set. So it's a funny old business.
Sure is. It sounds like a lot of fun. It also sounds really exhausting. Yeah. My final question is, like, you know, it's a really good one. I think it's one of the most positive aspects about your work, and that is being recognised by your peers, particularly in the TV Academy. You were nominated last year. The episode submitted was critical, and firstly, I'm just wondering what that was like when you found out you were nominated. Did it just put a spring in your step, or was it more to it than that?
I mean, it was a pretty complicated feeling for me personally. I mean, obviously insane, like ridiculous. And I didn't know the nominations were coming out at the time. We'd been in lockdown. My dad had died just at the beginning of that first lockdown, and I felt like I was in this tiny bubble with my husband and my 3-year-old, having worked my socks off for 2 years. And suddenly our producer Michael called me and said, I just wanted to say congratulations. And I was like, what for? And then it was a bit of a, but it was kind of bittersweet, because I guess the person I really wanted to tell was my dad, and he didn't manage to see the series, or, you know, having worked so hard for that time, he was incredibly proud, and he would have like lost his mind basically, I think. So it was and then the other thing was that because of the pandemic, there was this enormous thing that it was sort of unprecedented, but it also felt like it was sort of happening to somebody else, because we couldn't go anywhere, and I couldn't see my team to celebrate with them and be kind of proud together, and it was a very odd sensation. And then so this certificate arrives, and so I've got this framed certificate that says I've had an Emmy nomination for outstanding period hair, and it just is like it just feels very unreal, and it's really cool.
It's like, you know, you'll always be, you know, we can refer to you as Emmy nominee, Cate Hall, and maybe one day Emmy winner. We'll see what happens. And speaking of, before we go, have you chosen an episode that you would submit to the Academy for a nomination?
Yeah, so we've submitted episode 10, which is War. And the reason behind that is because although you can't reference the whole series because you're choosing an episode, for me, I think nominating the last episode was important. Number one, because not all of our episodes feature both Thatcher and Diana and all the royals. So it was really important for me that we represented our sort of the broad spectrum of our work. But also you're talking about the culmination of their narratives. And for that cast, the culmination of their entire journey on the show before we start a new cast. So for me, it felt really poignant just because it was like the end result of everything we've done.
Yeah, that's a really, really good choice. And I have a feeling that we'll be hearing more about that episode in the months to come. Cate, thank you so much for your time today. Congratulations on a really, really strong season 4.
Oh, thanks so much, Robert. Take care. Lovely to meet you.
You too.